Welcome, everybody. This is the second Clarify Your Value podcast. How we understand what we do well, how we do it, the impact we have, and even our purpose is strongly tied to this thing we've been doing since the dawn of time, which is sitting around the campfire and having conversations. It's the kind of conversations that happen when somebody goes out and finds resources. Because when they come back, they have more resources than just the blueberries they found, how they found those blueberries, what they did, all of the information in the experience is the resource that keeps us alive. And it's a resource that our brains are looking for from each other in every conversation. We're going to outline today, we're going to show with some volunteers that come to ask about, like, I'm looking for clarity here or here, is show you questions designed to get the story, to clarify the experience first, so that the individual may have more opportunity to come up with their own insights, may have more opportunity to answer the question on their own, but most importantly, feels as though the story is seen, heard, valued, and understood. And in doing so, allows their brain to now access the regions necessary to be able to accept advice, to be able to listen to opinions, and to be able to even take suggestions. And so much of what happens when people come to us for help is that we don't know unconsciously that we're actually working against that help because our brain is looking for connection first. We'll talk a lot about that science today, I'm sure, in different parts, but the structure is very simple. I'm going to ask for somebody in the audience. We're not live streaming today. Future will be live streaming, so somebody will call in, but today we've got people showed up on the YouTube. On the Zoom, and I'll just ask a little bit about what they're looking for clarity on. And the design is simple, using the questions we've outlined in the Finding Good framework we've built over the last 5 years. My job is to find part of their story, to understand where they've done something like this before, where they've experienced this before, and provide clarity for me. So essentially, I get the value from the conversation, from hearing their story, just like if somebody went and found blueberries and came back, asking them where and how they found it would ultimately be valuable to me. And in doing so, in doing that process and finding the value for me, we'll see the magic that happens with connection, which oftentimes helps people have insights, helps people, right, look differently at the challenge, but most importantly, puts them in a position where they're much more able to find the advice they need, to get the help or the assistance or the coaching they need, and how it makes the situation better for both people. I need to figure out how to do that in less than 10 minutes, but here we go. Yeah, so who, if anyone, who would like to be the first to sit around the campfire today? Kamisha, was that a hand up?
It was not, but it can be.
Is there like a place that, like, when you think about finding clarity, is there a place that kind of comes up for you right now?
Absolutely.
Hmm.
My search for clarity evolves around my work.
Mm-hmm.
I spent a long time being an executive assistant, try to move away from that field. And every job that not every job, the teaching and the teaching that I do and the support that I do keeps pulling me back into that field. And I'm not really sure where that's coming from, if it's because of my skill set or if it's because of my experience or just my general nature of being of a support or helpful person to others.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm not really sure right now where my footing is, but I'm very confident with my skills. I'm just not sure what I'm supposed to be doing with them. I'm not sure that this is the appropriate topic for today, but since I got my hand up there, I'll throw it out there.
It's absolutely appropriate, and I think it's appropriate because there's likely a lot of people sitting in your shoes, and what I'm hearing is, what do I want to be when I grow up? A little bit. Is that fair? Kind of like
Absolutely.
summation of that. So one of the approaches like we do, and I want to just kind of pause before we jump in. like the initial reaction we usually have when somebody comes to us with this sort of, when a friend is, I want to figure out what I want to do, I'm not sure where to go. Like our initial reaction is what, right? Like I'm sure almost everybody either listening on here or right listening right now live
Figure
already
it
has
out.
advice for Kamisha. Yeah.
Or
It already has, here's how you might go find it, here's what to do. And I want to just kind of recognize that before we go into the conversations, because I want you to, and again, if you're listening or you're live, what I want you to actually do is write down, you can write it down or just make a mental note of like, what advice would you give Kamisha right now? Right? Like, what is it that you're almost compelled to be like, oh, have you thought about this? Are you looking into this? Blah, blah, blah. I just wanted you to make a mental note. And then with that, at the end of Kamisha and I's conversation, which we're going to go into connection, clarify the story. I'm not going to go into coaching specifically. And in this one, it's actually a challenge to not go into coaching because the need, like the opportunity to help, which is super valuable to me, is really high. Like this tractor beam. So I'm going to avoid that. But I want all of us to kind of like just take a little mental note of what you're likely wanting to ask or wanting to advise, and then when we go through the conversation, I want to check back into that. All right, Kamisha. So one of my favorite things, like there's this like inherent value to me when folks are looking for that to answer that, like, what do I want to do? Where do I want to go? Right? And the thing that is always interesting to me is like when you think about where you've been, where was it that if you think about all the jobs you've done, right? Which one can you identify not just a job, but a specific time when you were performing in a job where you just felt the most alive?
I think the time I feel most alive is when I solve something under the gun of
Mm-hmm.
time.
So when you solve somebody, can you give me like a specific moment? Like it could be the best one or just one that you can really think of. Like, what is it that
Certainly,
you're?
a grant deadline, for example, and there's no way to get it to the grant office in time to make the deadline unless I take it myself.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't ask permission. I don't ask for, hey, this is what I'm doing. I just do it. And I'm okay with the consequence because they were not happy I did that. And I made the deadline for the grant for our office. So I was really
Now,
happy about that. But my colleagues were not. I'm not
so
really
there,
sure why.
so that happened recently. Is that what I'm hearing?
not
Like that.
not too recently, but that's probably the most specific example I can think of right off
Yeah.
the top of my head.
Okay. And so you're thinking about that specific one. Like, what is it about? Like, what is it? What was it about being able to sneak this in? Because I heard they kind of didn't want me to. I did it anyway. And did it turn out good too, or no?
It did turn out good for me. I got reprimanded actually.
Oh, okay, fair. Yeah. So, what about that experience gave you that feeling of being alive in there?
Well, feeling important, feeling like it
Mm,
mattered. The work I did mattered.
right?
The fact that it wasn't operating in a vacuum. I didn't just turn into superwoman all day and be like, it's only on me. There truly was no other option available at the time
Mm-hmm.
that decision had to be made. And feeling good about that decision was probably the most that I felt good about. Like that was the energy that I was like confident about. I felt really good that I just said, you know what? I have to make a decision. It might not be the right one, but I've had to do things under deadlines before, and I'm just going to go with like my options. This is it. I'm going to go. I'm going to take it right now. So
I'm curious, you said it was important, yeah? And you also said it's not in a vacuum, there were other people involved. What made you say, why was it important? And does that have, is that tied into other, is that sense of importance also tied into the fact that other people were being impacted from this?
What made it important probably was the money attached to it, right? As a grant award. So if that money came through, we got the grant, it would mean more money for research for our team. Uh,
Why was this one important to you? Was it, I mean, there's that, we got the money for the grant, but what did that mean in that instance? What did it mean for the immediate team that you were able to make that decision?
hmm, that's a great question. I'm not really sure. I mean, I think for me, uh, in that profession, the expectation is we just get things done.
Mhm.
Like the
So,
profession of an executive assistant is you take care of it. If there's nobody else to do it, you just do it
yeah,
because they're
so
counting on you to do that.
let me ask it this way. What did it, what do you hope it said to the team that you made that decision?
That I care about the
Hmm,
success of our group
right? And this is going to sound redundant. Why do you care about the success of the group?
because I want to continue being employed.
Yeah, I'm going to go a little deeper than that, right?
Well, I mean, could you repeat that particular part of the question again?
Yeah. So maybe I'll ask it this way. Um, is it, how important is it that you have your fingerprints on the success of the group?
Oh, for my ego, it's very important. but but for reality, it's not important. It's just who gets it done.
Yeah, so I want to split this out. So you said for my ego, it's important, but so I'm just going to ask it real clearly. Did it mean that you were needed in that moment?
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
I was
So,
needed. I was needed. Yeah, that's
mhm.
perfect.
Yeah, so I'm curious about that energy right there because you like I was needed. Like, how does it feel for you to be needed?
Oh, it's wonderful.
Yeah.
It's wonderful to be needed.
And what was the skill that was most needed in this situation?
The skill that was most needed in this situation was, if I'm very specific, knowing how to navigate the federal, like the federal buildings to deliver the grant.
Okay, and the skill that allowed you to know that was what?
Uh, Experience, really.
hmm
I mean,
Like,
I worked on in the nation's capital, so you have to know all the as it is as an assistant, you have to plan and map all the all the federal buildings to know where things have to go.
this is the fun part right here. You have to know and plan and map is not true. And what I mean by that is you believe you have to plan and map because you have a specific skill set. Yeah?
Yes.
What is the skill set behind knowing like I need to plan, I need to map, I need to be prepared? A person that knows that the things happen when I plan, map, and prepare has what skill set?
I want to say survival.
Okay, yeah. Survival, because is it organization? Is it like, is there an intuition part of it? Like what?
No, it's an organization. It's an
Yeah,
organizational skill.
Yeah, so you have some pretty deep, like solid organizational skills that,
Organizational and contingency planning
yeah,
skills.
like see how that got deeper now? Like organizations, contingency planning in a place where it's needed the most.
Correct.
Yeah, I'm gonna stop there.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm gonna stop there because we have a bit of the story. Like now I have this experience from you of what it looks like to like when you're right at your best and alive. And what why this one is interesting to me personally, we'll go to the audience as well, is I this is one of my favorite questions to ask because I think so many of us like struggle with, oh, I want to be in a place I feel alive and engaged, right? And hearing your story of where you're alive and engaged is really compelling to me because I relate to very little of what you said. That might sound counterintuitive, but why is it that, like, because I relate to so little, your story might have a ton of value for me?
Different perspective.
Yeah. Yeah, that idea that like, oh, you had like this thing helps you be alive and something else helps me alive, that just allows me to actually be more comfortable in what brings me joy and makes me feel alive. Now, I want to unpack this a little more, but I want to check in with the group, right? What I want to check in with the group is what were you initially, when I asked you before this conversation, what were you going to ask? What advice were you going to give? And like when you think about that now, what you were going to say in the beginning, like, does it still work or would you refine it? Refine it. Felipe, tell me about that. Like, what were you initially thinking?
I was thinking first of, yeah, like looking for the emotion, what she liked the most doing,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
right? But that was just, that would be a first level layer, right, of an
Mm-hmm.
answer. She would find the emotional connection that she felt, but that would leave her at that, right? So she would compare and contrast maybe. Uh, And the way I would refine it now is, well, digging in deeper, um, which is finding the the value in her, which in terms of what just happened is her skill that she applied there, that
Mm-hmm.
allowed her to create this feeling of
Yeah.
being valued and needed, right? So yeah.
In the story, like when we engage the whole story, we get a little bit more of both. And now I want to jump back to Kamisha. Like so, Kamisha. Now, again, the purpose of the conversation, and I didn't say this at the beginning of the podcast, but I'll say it now. When we did the podcast a week ago, we did the conversation for 20 plus minutes, and you can certainly do that. And I'm imagining anybody listening to this can like see where you continue this conversation with Kamisha. There's a lot of other avenues to explore. But what we wanted to do is get enough of a snapshot that there might be some connection happening. And where I start with connection is like, even though I can't relate to the story, now I see the story. Now I feel like I understand it a little more from that perspective. And that's kind of where I stop because, like, it would be really easy for me to go right into coaching right now or to give you advice right now. And there's plenty that I want to do. But what I want to stop there and check in with you, given how far we've come, is that in that, what do I want to be when I grow up? From when we just started talking to just now in the 5 or so minute conversation that we had, what might have changed for you? Like, what do you have now that a little bit more of, or even a little bit less of, now than at the beginning of the conversation?
I definitely have a different view of, what that energy is from. Like, initially I thought that the energy was from the adrenaline of the moment and the deadline.
Yeah.
And now I see it more as kind of like a stamp of validation that I do well at my job with my skills. And maybe that applies everywhere, or maybe it doesn't, but I see it differently than just the adrenaline rush of that particular deadline.
Yeah, I love how you explain that too, because why this is so important. And again, doing connection before we go into coaching and advice is if I believed you, it's not that I didn't believe you, but I knew that there was more behind the story because there is with all of us, right? And if I would have like if and this is how it happens in real life for all of us. As a friend comes and says, I want to figure out what I want to do with my life, and we get that, like as Felipe said, like that kind of first order question of like, okay, well, what are you looking for? Well, in your words right there, you would have said, I want more of this adrenaline engagement, like feeling important. Yeah. And now I've got a ton of answers for you. Well, like you probably should help people pack their parachutes for skydiving, right? Like all of this other stuff, right? But because I don't have your story yet, right? I like now I'm giving you advice that might not stick, right?
Mm.
And what happens, the process that we're doing is like just me asking where did it happen, how, and sticking in like I need to have clarity of the story is where you find clarity as well. Like I'm not trying to take you anywhere in the story. I'm trying to help, like, I'm just trying to see what it looks like. And that in our brains is actually a form of validation, which is the word you brought up, right? If I do an activity, right? Does the activity matter? Is the activity valuable? But this weird thing happens that like my brain says, oh, the activity is just getting the adrenaline. The activity is just staying engaged, but it's actually all the things that went into it. And because you've done those things so many times, your brain actually discounts it.
Mm.
It doesn't see that it was organization, that it was planning, that was contingency planning, that was like bomb proofing this scenario. So, right, so that in the moment I can make this amazing decision, even though it pisses people off, and be comfortable with it. It doesn't see all of that because that has been happening so much. That is a natural skill set for you. And it's actually easier for me to explore that because that is absolutely not my skill set. Hence the reason we're not live streaming today, because I did not, like, I thought I tested it and I tested it wrong, right? Like that. So I'm just pointing that out to say, or not just pointing that out, I'm pointing it out to like really clarify, like that is that instance of the clarity that we seek in ourselves virtually almost relies on connection, because I'm going to ask and seek clarity in a way that you won't for yourself, because so much of that other part of the story, your brain is just like, hey, we got it, right? Like it's not, you're not necessarily looking for clarity in there. You're just looking for that, right? How do I get more of this, right? And so being like that simple start of like, wait, where have you had it before? Is going to save so much time, right?
Mm.
I mean, for both of us, right?
Right.
For you, but also for if you come to me or somebody else asking for help, I don't want to waste time giving you advice, like, or oh, you can go get more energy here, and you're like, yeah, great, and then I feel that, and you feel that, and we both leave, and I'm like, why doesn't Kamisha take my advice? She told me what she wanted, and I told her 5 ways to get it, and she never listens, right? She doesn't actually want it, right? And that, again, that's the experience that we all have. But if I'm able to really clarify that story underneath it, right, then yeah, then now we're both in a better position to, right? If I was to give advice, if I was to start coaching, I can do it much more efficiently now, right?
Right. And I appreciate seeing that conversation about how the discounting my skill set because I do it so often.
yeah, yeah. The things that we are best at are the things that are hardest to see within ourselves.
Mm.
Full stop. And the reason for that is because we have this like weird feeling that everybody else can do it. If it's not hard for us, it must be easy for everyone else, right? I can think about that in this business. Like I've always kind of engaged in questions in this way in one form or another. Part of that is just my neurodiversity. Like I'm just literally looking to understand other people's experiences because my brain looks at it so differently. And for a long time, like it even became hard to teach this because I'm like, how do you not know these? How are you not asking this all the time? And people are looking at me because, well, because I'm not a weirdo, Brian. That's your kind of bag, right? But like, but that like leaning into that and saying, oh, yeah, no, this is the thing that engages me, and this is comes with connection. And that's not to say that we can't find that on our own, but it is absolutely saying it is exponentially harder to find on our own. We are just not designed to find that clarity on our own, and we are conditioned to believe we are. And that if we can't find it on our own, there's something wrong with us.
Did you say we are conditioned to believe that we are able to find
Yeah,
it
I
on
think,
our own?
yeah. So so much, and this is, I want to say this without, like discarding the value and a lot of, self-help psychology, things of that nature. But we have this, there's very rampant, apparent, you just need to go, think on your own. You just need, here's these reflection questions that you do on your own. Like there's just a lot of this idea that, that clarity is going to come from within, right? Like,
I
for
find
instance,
that
like,
incredibly frustrating because when somebody says you can figure it out if you try hard enough, but obviously you can't always figure it out if
yeah.
you try hard enough.
And again, we're not designed to. It's not actually in our survival interests to do it on our own. Yeah.
Mm.
And it's just harder. And that's and it's not that I feel, I said the science kind of like points to the same thing within self-validation. Yes, you can self-validate, right? It is exponentially easier when you're in a community that validates you. Period. Right? Like that's not even an argument. But we continue to tell people like you need to learn to self-validate instead of like you need to learn to build community so self-validation isn't such an uphill battle. You need to learn to build relationships and be in communities that you help other people see their value and they help you through engaging in these type of conversations. What was your experience? You being around people that are, interested in your experience and that you are equally interested in their experience, not interested in changing them, not interested even in helping them, but interested in understanding and learning from them, right? And as we create those communities around ourselves, then all of those other things become easier to build. And that's sort of the selfish part of me being on this podcast, right? Like being able to, for me, it's validating just to know that, oh, Kamisha, who is very organized and planned and got her stuff together, also wonders what she wants to be when she grows up, like I do. Right. And all of a sudden, that thing that I struggle with is now easier. Right? All of a sudden, seeing you take ownership for that organization, that ability, is now makes it easier for me to take ownership of my unique talents and abilities. And to know that, like, oh, maybe I don't see it as clearly, and maybe that's okay too, right?
Sure.
Beauty, nice, good first round. I feel like Could do another. What do you? Do you want to explore anybody else? Ren or Ken or Angela or Kimberly? What? One of two things. A is the advice you were going to give in the is how you would have approached in the beginning. Did that change, right, from the beginning of the conversation to the end? And or what value did you find from Kamisha's story? Like, how did you relate? Or yeah, Angela, what do you got?
I don't know if it's just because I've been around for so long but my mind went right to, oh my gosh, I'm so figuring that out in my life. Help me.
Mm-hmm.
Like I was eager to hear the story and go, oh, okay. And your questions triggered questions in my, the same, and not her answers, but different answers. I was almost in another world. And I
Mm-hmm.
thought, wow, I'm so glad she's good at organizing. And I want to be good over here. And how do I do that? Like, so it was a different process because it used to be I'd be ready to give that advice. For me,
Mm-hmm.
though, it's like I froze. I was like, oh, this is a really hard question for me right now. I don't know. What would I ask? That was actually
Mm-hmm.
where I got stuck.
Yeah. So there's two things in what you just said that I think are worth or that jump up to me as like really important that a lot of us are challenged with. When somebody's asking for clarity in a place that we're searching for clarity, the need to help them starts to get almost overwhelming. Yeah. It's sort of like if you've watched a really good movie, and I always think about like whenever I think about this concept, I'm thinking about Rudy Rudiger, right? The movie Rudy back in the day. When I first watched Rudy, I was like 13 or 14, and I was just really awkward. I got all my height in a year, and it was like, on the football field, I looked like, a brand new giraffe just trying to figure himself out, right? But I remember watching Rudy, who, I got literally laughed out on the field. I had no athletic coordination. And then this kid just had grit. And I really related to that. And I just remember watching the movie like if he doesn't make it, I'm not gonna make it. You know what I mean? Like I'm into this story, right? And we get emotionally tied in. Well, when somebody comes to you with, I'm looking for clarity or I'm trying to solve a problem, and it's the problem you're dealing with, the desire to help them goes up exponentially because now you're kind of tied together, if you will, right? It's almost this insecurity of like, oh, I can help you, then I can believe I can help myself, right? And this shows up in so many different ways, but like, the person that is most likely that is trying the hardest to give you help is likely the person struggling with the same thing the most. If you know that, the second piece becomes like really what you just outlined becomes like the real possibility. When you said like, oh, I lost myself in that story. When somebody comes in, I'm trying to figure this out, I'm trying to do this, and I have that like, oh, me too, that is such an opportunity to be like, oh, wait. Tell me about this. Tell me about where you've had it before. Tell me about what it looks like. Not tell me about the problem, but tell me about like, where have you seen this before? Where have you done this before? And I'm going to get lost in that story. And I can tell you the scientific parts of like, it's very much like meditation. It's very much like you're taking yourself, when you're really engaged in somebody else's story, your brain and their brain fire virtually the same, right? You can look this up on Google. You'll see this imaging of a storyteller and a listener, and their brains are firing. And so that kind of tells us that like our brain is experiencing their experience without us even having to go through it, which is like training for us to overcome the same problem without having to do the work of training. I just have to get the detail in the story. And now my brain having, right, activated in that way has this experience, just like visualization, just like meditation, that I have overcome the story, that I've already done that in some degree. Right. So I love that you pointed that out, because like the biggest opportunity to lose ourselves in the story is find somebody whose story or who's looking for clarification in the same place we are.
How did you come up with your question though? Your first question was something like, can you identify a time when you felt most alive? Like, how did you, if you're struggling with that, like what was your point in going to that question?
Yeah, so if you look back in the conversation, and I just reference that so people can go and fact check me, if you will. When Kamisha was first identifying it, I remember her using, so I kind of picked up on words like alive, and or she didn't say alive, but it felt like somewhere in the neighborhood of like engaged, to feel like purposeful, something in that area, right? And so for me, my brain just heard, yeah, I'm gonna, you know, I heard 3 or 4 descriptors that were like engage at a higher level, and like for me, I was like, oh, that sounds like alive, right? So I just used that word to kind of encapsulate all of them. But that's a good point. The starting point for me in getting into the story is about using their words, right? But I need to use it in a way that I understand. If that makes sense. So I might even check in on like, hey, when you say this, what does that mean? And then go into the story. Yeah. Kimberly.
There's a quality that when she felt this aliveness, because she said she was reprimanded. So, and I'm not sure what the quality is that she has, but there's some quality that that's there that I can't name exactly, but she did something with her own initiative, with her own sense of authenticity that I see also, that she might be proud of, that I can't name. I don't have my finger on it.
And what you're pointing out there, Kimberly, and what like kind of makes me smile when I hear it, is that these type of conversations, again, when I'm not looking to help somebody, or rather, if I want to make help actually stick, right? When I'm focused on connection, what generally happens is an increase in curiosity. Like there are likely 5 or 6 different avenues that, well, not likely, I know 5 or 6 different avenues that Kamesha and I could jump back on that I would stay engaged for the next half hour, right? Like, tell me more about this, and where did this go? And again, like throughout human history, we did this 4 hours a night. If you just use that like blueberry scenario, you go out and find blueberries, everybody in the pack is going to ask you where, how, when, why. And it's all that frequency of question that help you get the clarity of your value, but it also, right, just creates this natural curiosity between us. Because what we're identifying is what we need from the other person. That I'm asking the questions because that resource of experience has value to me. I'm not asking the question to make Kamesha feel better. It's when a person feels needed because the person asking the question actually needs the thing that they're saying, that feeling valued, feeling seen, and feeling heard happens. If I approach this conversation trying to make Kamesha feel better, which I'm not saying that we don't still approach conversations that way, we wouldn't have had the same experience, right? That she might feel valued to a degree, or rather, what she'll feel is that I value her. But that's different from her feeling valued. And for me to have a better opportunity of her to feel valued, I have to find what I need from her. Because everybody inherently needs to feel needed. Not dependency needed, but that like my strengths, my abilities, like my experience is going to provide value to this other person, right? That's why people like speaking so much, is because this thing, like I just had to talk and you're better off. I'll do this all day long because I feel needed up here, right? We'll transition to the next conversation with that one. Yeah, we got time. Let's try another one. Anybody else want to sit around and have a chat, as it were? We did a shorter one and then I talked for 15 minutes. So here we go. Who's in charge of this? Not me. Yeah.
Hey, Brian, this is Ken. Let me just jump in real quick. Just environment wise, I'm not a
No worries.
candidate this week for the longer conversation, but do want to just fill in on as you jumped into the conversation, you asked the question. One of the things I appreciated about it was if I just use that as a practice, it causes me to pause and to listen deeper just at the jump, because as you mentioned, right, the tendency there is to jump right in and go at it. And it seems to me it would serve everyone involved if at first there's an opportunity, there's a positive stumbling block to give time to understand more, because I can always understand more, and anything that follows might be more helpful. But
Yeah.
just to have that, like I said, kind of a speed bump, if you will.
Yeah, 100%. You actually make me think of Car Talk. Remember, everybody listened to Car Talk back in the day?
Yeah.
The Tappet Brothers on
Yep.
NPR. So for those that don't know, Car Talk was these older gentlemen that had run a mechanic shop for their whole lives, and they start a radio show where people call in and like, my car is doing this. Well, what you'll notice, what is genius about the show, in my estimation, but where we could learn a lot from that, is people would call the show and they would say, "Oh, my car's doing this. My car's doing this," and they would have some really like detailed descriptions. Here's what I think the problem is. Here's what's happening. And never, and this is one of the things I think made the show successful, but it's also like how we would like all our mechanics to operate, but it's such a good example of how we can better operate with people. Like Kenneth's saying, is what they did was, well, tell me more about the car. Now I want to know the make and model of the car. I want to know a little bit of the story, which was them just being interested, like, oh, how did you find it? But then tell me the story of the noise, right? Oh, it's making this noise. Well, they would get just so creative in how they would unpack the story. It sounds like this. Well, is that a bird sound or is that a wolf? Like they would and what was happening is they were seeking clarity in that story, even though they likely had multiple ideas of what it could be from the very beginning. They'd been mechanics their whole lives. I would argue that the majority of the time that they heard, oh, it's going to be in this and this, they had ideas right out of the gate. But in engaging the story, the ideas and the advice were much more in line with what was happening with the person. And not only were they more in line, what they likely didn't realize is because the person got to tell their story, the person is now much more likely to listen to that advice. This happens with your doctor. This happens at the mechanic. This happens with anybody you're seeking help with. If they haven't got the full story, it doesn't matter if they're right. There's this natural inclination to push back on it because that's your brain seeking validation. It has less to do with the answer. And so 100% agree, like hitting the brakes, to use a mechanic analogy, right? Hitting the brakes to ask about the story has multitude of benefits for both individual. And that's I call it connection first, right? And I literally, like, if I don't have a tattoo, but if I was to get one, that one would be on my forehead. Hey, remind me not to just start to data dump on you like I like to do, right? If I can engage the story first, it's going to be better for everyone, right? Yeah, it's 100% agree. Felipe, you were in the process of volunteering. Maybe you weren't, but now.
Oh, I totally was. I have no idea what to talk about, but that could be a great starting point.
Fair. So I kind of circle around clarity sometimes, but sometimes it's like if there's a challenge you're trying to overcome or even a goal, like all those are areas of like clarity is valuable. Like when I say those things, what jumps up to you? Like what is?
Um, so what I'm trying to overcome or working on overcoming
Mm-hmm,
is my ability to focus. So, what do you want to hear about that?
yeah. So I'm just inclined to actually approach it this way, and you can tell me if you want to do this, but if you and I were meeting over coffee or at a bar or something, right? Meeting over some drinks, and you were going to complain to me about something right now, what would it be?
If I were to complain,
Yeah, if you were
um,
just to dump like, here's the thing that is annoying me the most right now, that not necessarily about like out there, but whichever. Yeah, yeah. And maybe
um,
it has to
it,
do with this focus thing. Yeah, yeah. But go ahead.
um, yeah. So it's catching myself. So
Hmm.
um, I see that my heart's in a good place. I want to create value for people and for myself and my family.
Hmm.
And I suddenly realized that I was looking to create a third income
Hmm.
um, branch or inflow, and just by spending time in looking for the angle where to what to do here and there,
Hmm.
like I kind of came to realize that I needed to, well, sell a lot off for me to
Hmm.
actually make this even worth my time and my while. And then that got me to think and see how, while I was searching for this third line of revenue, I wasn't investing all that time into the actual first line that I already have identified. And that if I had, it would have set me up um, much faster and easier to actually reach the outcome that I want to.
So I'm going to
Uh,
go a little different avenue here because you said catching yourself, right?
mhm.
Like you've caught yourself and so there's a frustration in there. Is that
Yeah.
fair? Like, oh, my focus was off and I'm catching myself with this focus that is off. Yeah. So I'm
Yes.
I'm gonna approach this at a slightly different angle again because this is the angle I'm interested. So I'm gonna identify the selfishness in my, reasoning. Like the story I'm interested in, um, is in catching yourself, right? Like you saw this focus and now changing it. Like how have you been like? How is the process of catching yourself and like maybe being okay with that or moving? Like how are you dealing with catching yourself, if that makes sense?
Um, with compassion
Hmm.
and with making a conscious decision. And so that makes me think of another example, which is when I sit down to work and I get really energized in what I'm doing, I suddenly feel the need to just get up and move
Hmm.
and or go for a cup of coffee or just do something else.
Hmm.
And today, and I mean nowadays, I
Hmm.
catch myself wanting to do that. And I realize that that's the moment where I need to re-engage with the focus that I'm in. And I do so, um, and I continue. And of course, eventually I do break away, but that's how I've
What?
been.
So you said the compassion part, but like, tell me about how that works out in real time. Like, my focus was off. Like, how do you? Because I think a lot of people like my focus was off, and then it's 10 minutes of beating myself up, right? And then maybe next day I have compassion or something. Like, what? Like, how does? Tell me about how is the compassion like in the moment? Is
Yeah,
it, and
the,
what does it
the
look like?
the compassion comes in the moment because, well, I've faced myself and my own habits so many times before, and
Mm-hmm.
I've studied it, that I already understand and know through experience and embodiment that me judging myself is only a waste of time and energy.
And so
And actually,
is the compassion then like, is it like I'm interested in like the tangible, if you will, like do you pause and breathe? Do you sit back? Do you go for a walk? Like what is your process for compassion in that moment?
um, so I notice the impulse to get up or move,
Mm-hmm.
and as soon as I notice it, uh, I actually have to step back because focus is in my awareness.
Mm-hmm.
Then when I sit down to work, I set an intention. Like I'm going
Mm-hmm.
to work, like I'm going to be focused. And sometimes I said, use the Pomodoro technique,
Mm-hmm.
25 minutes working straight until I have hit the 25 minutes, and I give myself 5 minutes of break, and then
Right.
that rinse and repeat. Or
Mm.
and so because I've already set an intention and I find myself trying to get up, I go like, oh, okay, here's just me feeling energy
Mm.
that I need to channel or rechannel again here, and I come back to continuing the work.
So
It's
yeah, go ahead.
yeah, it's a great point because it's because I have set an intention that I'm able to catch myself when I'm doing it.
Yeah, that's interesting. I like that, like that idea that like, oh, it's not just randomly catching it in the moment. It's actually like how like what I've done before to prepare for that moment. So the compassion is like, yeah, I have an intention and I have a plan for when it pulls, when I, deviate, which that like planning for I might deviate is actually the moment of compassion, right? Before the thing even happened, compassion happened like, okay, I have this intention and I have a plan for when I might deviate is like preemptive compassion, if you will, right? Like, hey, and it's setting that expectation, like, hey, maybe this, right?
Yeah.
And I actually want to stop there because your initial and I felt myself like I could run into coaching right now without stopping, pass and go, like, and I'm sure others on the call, but your initial like, okay, clarity with focus that you kind of talked about initially, like I'm curious, and we just explored like one part of the story, but just in exploring the part of the story we did, what what what, what do you have more of or less of than even just 5 minutes ago?
Wow, and an understanding on how to practice compassion,
Yeah.
and I coach people, so this is really helping a lot. The people I coach.
Yeah, because I just love it. It's like this is what I tell other people to do, and oh, I guess I do it this way, right? Like, and it's so much like Kamisha's story, right? Like we're so close to it that like again and even when you said it you were like compassion. I was like, oh, so in the moment I do something in compassion, and now like, oh, wait, compassion is actually like even how we set it up, which is like I'm writing that down somewhere today because that is you just think about it through that lens is just for me like uber helpful. Yeah. So I'm curious what like if we were to go into coaching, I would want to know like given the problem you outlined before, like where you can apply this. And it makes me think that like you already have some ideas for that.
Yeah, totally. Well, the first thing is I co-create solutions for my clients, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I help them find what works for them, right? Not
Mm-hmm.
exactly what works for me. But or having said that, where it really helps is I use a lot of my experience to show them how I deal with things today. And a lot of them have actually raised their hands and told me like I have feedback forms after our coaching,
Mm-hmm.
and so they have told me like I would love to hear a bit more about your stories and your struggles. And so just having that level of clarity allows for me to share and make it easier for them to plan for their compassion for the moments
Yeah.
where they need it the most.
And now you just clip this part of this episode and send that to them. Like, hey, here's my
Yeah.
story. Here you go. Right?
Yeah.
Outline of that. Yeah. And I love how that's articulated. Like, again, reinforcing connection. It's just we're sharing stories, right? And
Yeah.
again, if I think about that in terms of story, like the hardest story to understand is my own. But that there's a benefit of that. Is that that means that nature doesn't want me to be alone. And I even take that a step further, like just in these two conversations, there's not a person listening to it that even though like with Kamesha's I couldn't directly relate because the skill sets were different, that I mean initially related on like, oh, figuring out where I'm most alive, right? And how I don't see that, and me being able to, or rather, people being able to see themselves in your story, Felipe, of like having compassion and oh, there are things I do before. The fact that we all can find ourselves in each other's story, to me, says we're never in fact alone. It's just a matter of whether we're consciously finding ourselves in other people's story or not. That the solution for connection is how we're engaging, not whether or not, like, we don't even need someone. Now, we do need fundamentally to be needed to have people like that. That's a biological need, but we don't have to wait for somebody outside of our control to do that. We can see that we're needed in somebody else, in how we relate to other people's story. That idea like, oh, I'm struggling with the same things, oh, I'm interested in the same things, that all those places where we see we see ourselves in someone's story, sends a message to our brain that we are in fact needed, that our experience has value, right? And that's the underlying piece that lets everything else happen much easier. Once I know you understand my story, not because you wanted to be nice to me, but because like you want the best outcome for both of us, right? Then again it just gets easier because that's the design. The design is we do this together. Yeah. Everything else is a distraction. Yeah. Awesome. Yeah, man, two really good ones today. Questions on or comments on Felipe's or how somebody else might related to it, what you found in it. Yeah, Kamisha.
I really appreciated the level of self-awareness. Like, this is what I do. This is what happens. I immediately want to get up and get a cup of coffee. I remember hearing that. And I just really appreciated that level of like recognition of like, okay, this is how my body physically reacts to that energy.
Mm-hmm.
And it's it makes me want to go back and say, okay, well, what kind of situations do I have where I have trouble focusing? Now I can look at that and say, huh, do I have this? Do I ever use compassion for that? Or do I just,
Mm-hmm.
give up, throw the towel in, and don't go back to work?
Right. And
So thank you.
for me what's cool about that is like how we got that. Meaning like, if Felipe would have came in and said, Kamisha, for you to focus, you need to do this and this and this. And he could have outlined everything we just outlined in the story. But like our brain hears that and will sort of naturally push back, right? But being able to hear it in the story, now I want to engage Felipe, like, okay, tell me a little bit. Now I'm ready for the advice part, right? Because when the story is exchanged, we feel like equals. Once we move into suggestions or advice or opinion, that equal feeling starts to go away. And so if we do the equal feeling first, not as a like, not just as a like to make the other person feel better or as a like, but because there is value in that for both, then both people feel needed and valued. And now we can do this, meaning like sometimes I give advice, sometimes you give advice, right? Which is, again, that's the platform that we all need if we're going to help somebody, if we're going to coach somebody, if we're going to lead them. Like that's where connection is a platform that allows those other things to happen. Kimberly, what did you have?
I really love, I wrote down the idea of pre-planning compassion. I think that's very wise.
Felipe, I think that's a book.
Yeah.
Yeah. Preemptive compassion. I like
Definitely.
it.
Thank you, Kim.
Yeah. Well, so last call for questions or comments, and then I'm gonna run us out. I think we had two really good conversations today. Anybody else got any last things to add before I kind of wrap it up for the day? Yeah, awesome. Well, I want to thank Kamisha and Felipe specifically for engaging in the conversation, sitting around the campfire. We used to call it the hot seat, but the idea is that it just feels like we're sharing stories around the campfire. It shouldn't be um, like really uncomfortable, those sorts of things, even though it does feel vulnerable to be able to share and to be able to look into these. Like we can feel like we should know the answer, it's we don't, but that's just not the case. As humans, we're designed, we don't see the story clearly until we connect with others that help us do that, right? And today I thought we had two really good examples. Kamisha with what do I want to be when I grow up, that turned into, oh, I have these pretty impressive skill sets that are implied in or that are applied in the right situations that can have a lot of value. I feel really engaged. And Felipe, this frustration of focus was actually like this hidden story about how building compassion happens way before the moment, and that there's actually like a lot of things that go into creating that. So if you're listening to this, just like me, like there's a lot of benefit in these stories, and there's a lot of benefit in the story of the people around you and the challenges they've been through and the experiences they've had, if we're able to engage them. So much of what we teach at Finding Blueberries is how do you engage that, right? How do we collect the stories? The Finding Blueberries app is about exchanging the stories, and even the certification we teach is about how to help coaches and leaders like build that connection first, how to get individuals to share not just with them, but with each other, so that everything becomes easier, right? That when we have connection, when we have that clarity, advice is taken easier, like direction is taken easier, but we're able to more effectively help each other, coach each other, lead each other when that foundation of connection is built. So I appreciate you all. This is a whole lot of fun for me. I could just turn on the camera and have these conversations all the time. And I hope you have more. If you're listening, Tuesdays at noon Mountain. And next week, we're going to do a better job of trying to go live. We probably have a different sign-up form for the people to call in. I think we'll go live on Instagram, so hope to see you there. Feel free to reach out for days and times. We'll have a sign-up form out because we have to change how we do this on Zoom. But I'll have that out in the next 24 hours. Anybody wants to sign up. Thank you all for having me. I appreciate it. And as a closer, just stop giving advice, start asking more questions. I don't know if that's my closer, but we'll do that today. All right.
Thanks,
Take care.
everybody.
Bye-bye.